What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mostly Occasionally Show. I'm your host, Brandon Wenner, the publisher of BroBible.com. I am so excited about today's show. I just had a wonderful conversation about two of my absolute favorite things, beer and the Grateful Dead. Today, I'm joined by Sam Calagione, the founder of Dogfish Head Craft Brewing, and David Lemieux, who's the Grateful Dead's longtime archivist and historian. So this is a really big year in the world of the Grateful Dead. 2025 just happens to be the Grateful Dead's 60th anniversary. And to celebrate, Dogfish Head just released a beer nationwide in collaboration with the band itself. It's called the Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale. It's 5.2% ABV, so it's not like some crazy pale ale. Very drinkable, and has a big Stealie on the package and everything. I mean, this beer is going to be nationwide, and Deadheads everywhere are going to love it. In addition to the beer, Sam and David also collaborated on a series of vinyl records where both of them, along with Sam's 25-year-old son, Sammy, who is a huge Deadhead himself, they all curated a set of songs, and this is all to listen to while drinking beer on the porch this summer. It's a selection of Grateful Dead cuts and from the archive and from over the decades, and I was really excited to learn that there's some special 80s Dead there. But in full transparency, they don't actually go into detail on what it is because they're saving that for a release date down the line here. That's going to come out on Record Store Day here in April. This conversation was an absolute dream. David Lemieux is a wealth of knowledge about the Grateful Dead and their 60 years of history. He's curated series like Dave's Picks and many other archival releases with the band over the years. He also hosts Today in Grateful Dead History on the SiriusXM Grateful Dead channel. So I really enjoyed picking his brain about some chapters in the band's history and how he applies his editorial lens to that overall process. And Sam, well, look, if you know beer, you know that Sam is a complete legend in the beer world. Dogfish Head Craft Brewing is one of those breweries that started, they were a trailblazer, they were a pioneer, and, you know, you kind of had Sierra Nevada in California, and then in the Mid-Atlantic on the East Coast, you had Dogfish Head. And of course, you had Sam Adams and the whole nine yards, but Dogfish Head blew up in the DC, Philadelphia area. It's based in coastal Delaware, Milton, Delaware. They have a big brewery in Rehoboth Beach, tap room, restaurant, live music space, the whole nine yards. Dogfish Head at this point in time is a East Coast institution in the beer world. The Boston Beer Company actually purchased Dogfish Head Brewery for $300 million in a cash and stock deal in 2019. That combined two of the biggest craft breweries in the United States. And what's super cool was talking to Sam and hearing his enthusiasm about this collab. I mean, the guy keeps it real. He keeps it 100 and true to the brand's roots. And he's just at the helm of doing really cool, thoughtful things like this about things he loves, like the Grateful Dead. So it completely rocked to talk to these two about both of these things and kind of how it is intersecting in this cultural moment. I really hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. If you do, hit the subscribe button. I'd be stoked to have you around listening to the Mostly Occasionally Show. And hey, have a great time this summer. Keep on trucking out there, and see you going down the line. Thank you so much for taking the time today, guys. I'm really excited to talk about this collab and what, you know, Dogfish Head is doing with the Dead and how just it dips into the Dead's incredible rich history. And I mean, it's Dead 50 year felt surreal. Like we're at Dead 60 year now, and like some more history has been etched in 10 years, like in doing so. And, you know, it's like one of those things that you just realize whenever you start going down this path in life. And as a Deadhead, as a lifelong pursuit, that like history is going to happen around you in this thing. And, that becomes a part of the chapters. And, I think Sam, I think your beer is like part of that chapter now in an interesting way. And I cannot imagine what that's like for someone who started brewing in an NYU dorm room, listening to the Dead, and seeing that culture unfold and how important I imagine it's been to Dogfish Head back in the day, and everything like that, to now actually be doing it with them, with Stealie and all.
Yeah. No, you're totally right, Brandon. And Dogfish one of our kind of rallying cries is the status quo sucks and it only exists until we come together as coworkers to collaborate and change it. And certainly the Grateful Dead was a catalyst for lots of change, not just, when you think about how different each of the musicians were and their complementary superpowers to come together, from Jerry with bluegrass and country to Pigpen with R&B, Bob with jazz, to have their own sound. Similarly, at Dogfish, we love coming to the idea of how we make a recipe with no expectations that it has to be militant English beer styles or German beer styles. We want to bring that creativity and unexpectedness to our recipes the same way the Grateful Dead brings creativity and unexpectedness to their sound.
Yeah, and this is your second collab, right? With the Dead, right? Was your first one for Dead 50 or the same in
It was
2015?
around then. David might remember more than I do, but we've been buddies, David and I, for almost a decade. So I think it's about almost a decade. I got to go to Phil's room, the Terrapin Station, with his sons and him for the release of that one, which was super cool. He's like, my sons are drinking your beer. They love it. I'm proud of this collab. I have a new liver, so I can't drink, but I smoked up before the show in honor of you, Sam. So that was a nice moment.
That rocks. That rocks. I mean, I remember that being just a very, like, it was so cool to see that the Dead actually dip into brewers culture, because I think that, like, brewing culture and what the Dead culturally was doing in the 80s and 90s are very linked, like, culturally together. And it kind of goes back to, like, the whole idea of, like, back in the day when the only Odie Stout or Nut Brown was like a Sam Smith ale that you like would only see on a Dead lot, sold out of a cooler for $5 or whatever.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah,
go ahead, David.
Dead lot was the first time that I was ever exposed. I'm talking late 80s, early 90s. First time I was ever exposed to actual beer, real, like, good beer. And to that point in my life, the big ones, that's all I knew. That's all I knew there was. I didn't know that there were these Dogfish Heads and things. And I remember 2012 or so when we first started working with Dogfish Head. We had a lot of meetings. It's when the Dead and the licensing team and management decided to enter this space. And there were certain people, executive type people, who wanted to go with bigger names, and then the creative people on the licensing team said, no, we want to go with Dogfish Head. And they explained why, and they explained, Sam's philosophy and going back to what kind of beer they were making. As he says, it's not just the normal stuff, it's off-centered. And when we heard more about it, we said, yeah, this is definitely the right fit for the Grateful Dead. And this is what it comes down to with the Dead, is we always want to work with like-minded, good people, and everybody at Dogfish Head. I remember the first time I've been to the Dogfish Head facilities a couple times now in Delaware, and it reminded me so much of Grateful Dead Productions, where there's a mutual respect from, Sam and Mariah all the way to everybody, the guy taking out the trash. Everybody's on equal footing, and there's a huge respect across the way. And everybody loved being there. You could just tell everybody was just loving their jobs, loving the organization. It reminded me a lot of Grateful Dead Productions. It was from the first time I went out there, been there a couple of times now, definitely the right fit. And so when this bigger one came up for Dead 60, it was, I don't even think anybody even considered ever a different brewery. It was like, we kind of only see it as, you guys are our partners. When it's time to do a beer, it's with you.
Yeah. It's such a perfect fit, like, for, both entities. We're gonna cover a lot of ground here. I want to start, Sam, though. Can you just talk me through the liquid a little bit? And that would be like a great starting point here.
And I'll do that like literally on the screen here, buddy. That's
Love
the
it.
sound. That's a beautiful Pavlovian nose. My that sound. My mouth's watering. So I'm gonna sip on this while I describe it to you. But for this one, we wanted it to be super approachable, but still have complexity. So one of our kind of filters on the way in is it needs to appeal to deadheads of all ages, shapes and sizes, not just hop heads, meaning we didn't want it to be a kind of unidimensional throat punch of bitterness from hops. We wanted to have complexity, be relatively light on the palate. So the keys to the recipe, it's 5.3 ABV. We gave it the simple name of just Dogfish Head x Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale. There's a little bit of granola in there, as you'd find on fake Shakedown Street or pre-gaming in the parking lot. A little oat and honey granola in there. And there's Kernza, which is a really interesting, sustainably oriented perennial grain that sequesters carbon, 5x what an acre of brewer's barley would. And that gives it a nice dryness at the end. So a little bit of malty sweetness from the granola up front, dries out with a Kernza, but the real kind of rock stars of the recipe are Azaka hops, which throws a lot of like mango and citrus character, and Eldorado hops, which is more like pineapple, watermelon, tropical. So 5.3 ABV. We just launched it last week. It's going to every Whole Foods. It's going to the Sphere. It's going to every Wegmans, every Publix, so it's our best launch of a new beer at Dogfish since we launched 60-minute IPA over 20 years ago.
Whoa, what a statement. That's a crazy statement coming from you, Sam.
I know. David and I have a lot to be proud of. We've been doing this for over a decade together, and we'll talk about the music component that we're celebrating this year too, but it's been a really rewarding project.
That is wonderful. That's awesome. It's so cool. It's so cool that it's going to be national. It's so cool that you're going to be able to enjoy it like at a venue like the Sphere while enjoying, the new interpretations of the Dead, and their continued residency there with Dead Company. And that's awesome. So music, like, I think that's like such a, it's a great way to collab, because that's what we do. We drink beer and listen to tunes, and we debate tunes, and we discuss eras. And I've yet to see what the actual like track lists are on this musical companion. And I was wondering, David or Sam, like, if you could talk me through a little bit of it. But before we do, I just hope that I'm hoping in my heart of hearts here that there's at least a little bit of 80s Dead on it.
There is one tune from the 80s. There is.
Yep.
Love it.
Hey, and Brandon, there's some 90s Dead.
Yes, love it. Yep. My favorite.
Yep. 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
We're covering all the decades. I love it.
Yep. And early 70s and late 70s, so you get a taste of both versions of the 70s. Oh yeah, it's and for something with, I will say only 6 tracks, but that first one is 15 minutes, and it's typical Dead. Yeah, it's an eclectic batch. We did an album with Dogfish Head a few years ago that was studio recordings, and it was, again, the focus was just something to sit on the porch and listen to Grateful Dead music, and while sipping a beer, of course. And this one is, we decided to go with the live route, and Sam and his son's friend had huge input on this one. We went to previously released live Grateful Dead archival releases, but all things that are sold out, that are out of print for the most part, that are not on streaming platforms. So these things on vinyl, first of all, they sound incredible. Dave Glasser, a longtime mastering engineer, kind of things. And it really sounds incredible, and it's got a flow. It's a classic 40 minutes, a little over 40 minutes of just great Grateful Dead music. And again, it's eclectic, 69, 73, 77, 89, 91. So we cover a little bit of everything.
That's wonderful. I mean, and it also, look, when you have a canon as big as what the Dead has too, and you think about the goals of pairing with a beer, there are certain things you're going to include. There's certain editorial decisions you're going to make there, versus the other. I mean, I assume you guys, do you know, when are you actually releasing the record?
On Record Store Day itself. So it's when we were talking
Awesome.
when we were talking about like epic anniversaries, this year's the Grateful Dead's 60th anniversary. It's Dogfish Head's 30th anniversary, and it's also the 10th anniversary of Dogfish Head being the official brewery of Record Store Day, the partner with the indie record stores from coast to coast. So, David and I are meeting in New York City, Brooklyn Bowl with Pete Shapiro in a few weeks to really launch the excitement, show off the artwork of the poster and the album. So yeah, it couldn't be more perfect time in this year of huge anniversaries.
That is super, super, super exciting. I'm just glad that it covers all the bases, like all the chapters. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely, absolutely incredible. I guess like this is a good time to talk a little bit about origin story. Like Sam, I'll never forget, I think it was 2009 or 2010, reading the New Yorker profile about you, that like where it really dug into a lot of your history with starting Dogfish Head. And that was what really like crystallized. I'm not gonna lie, I grew up going to Dewey Beach every summer for like 2 weeks. So like I knew of Dogfish Head, and I knew of kind of the loose cultural connections to like the Dead world and just how they're present in Sussex County, Delaware.
Yeah.
But I always, that article really like cemented for me though, what some of your ties were to the Dead. How did you like, I've never heard you talk about like what shows were you going to? Like what were you, were you a tour rat? What were you like? What was your summers looking like?
to be honest, Dead is my favorite band of my life, but I wasn't like into. I've been to Fish like a couple times in the Sphere and on a beach, but I only got to see Jerry twice in the early '90s with the Dead and my college buddies. And other than the Dead, and I came into the Dead just walking by a record store when I was 12 or 13 and seeing the cover of Shakedown Street and all the energy in those characters.
Yeah.
And bought it and wasn't listening to the Dead's live stuff until later, after I got into Workman's Dead and Shakedown Street and a few of the studio albums. And then it was in high school, I was more into punk rock and hip hop. Mm-hmm. And then in college, I met back up with some people that were into going out and seeing Dead shows, and that's the friend group that I got further into the live Dead. But for Dogfish, our holy trinity has always been original beer, original food, original music. And our little stage in Delaware has hosted bands as diverse as the Strokes, Built to Spill, Guided by Voices, Deltron 3030. So mostly in that indie rock hip hop vein.
Yeah.
But the Dead's always just been a centerpiece of my life. It's on my stereo almost anytime I'm in a car or on a boat. In fact, David, my son, and I are huge fishermen. I think Sammy respects David's fishing game as much as he respects his music game. So all this past summer, we were sharing ideas for tracks while we were bouncing around on our boats and making our tying flies in the case of Sammy and David. So
Love it.
And my son's 25, so it's a perfect example of, his generation and his buddy Dash, who went to NYU Film School. They were just as into working on this album and just as into the Grateful Dead as I am.
I always love hearing that, like, that there was something about the production of, the albums. And I mean, the Dead is such an iconography driven band. Like it's a band of symbols. And I think that like has a lot of way of pulling people in at a certain age. I always like to say that like what got me into the Dead was the fact that my babysitter's oldest son like had a Stealie, like a blacklight Stealie in his basement. And it was always like this mystique, like the older kid, like mystique
Cool kid
thing. Yeah, the older cool kid mystique thing. And then and then you start seeing it everywhere and you're like, ooh, what is it? Like, and that's always like super interesting. David, I have some questions for you in a second, but just something to follow up on that, Sam. Do you remember there's 2 Jerry shows that you saw. Do you remember what they were? Memories can be hazy, but do you remember what they were?
Yeah, they were in the Mid-Atlantic. I know one was at DC. What was the big space in like
RFK?
Yeah, it was RFK like 91-ish, or did they play there around 91?
Yep, June 14th.
I was there. That was summer 91. So that's the one that I remember being at, and I won't tell the story about the other one that was also in the Mid-Atlantic that I don't remember being at so much. I blame balloons.
So Hampton, it's the Mid-Atlantic. There was plenty of there's plenty of examples there.
How many times, Brandon? How many times did you get to see them with Jerry? I'm going to ask David the same.
0.
Yeah?
I'm 39, so
okay,
I am like, but I'm old enough to remember 90s Dead in culture, which is like I remember the Deer Creek gate crashing incident because it was on the Today Show before I went to swimming lessons.
Wow.
And I remember when Jerry died. I remember also my parents are both music teachers, so the Dead had this, and really into American roots music. So the Dead always kind of had this presence around us, where they aren't Deadheads, but there was always just an appreciation within their social circles and their circles. So my first Dead show was a Phil and Friends show in 2000 at Hershey Park. And it was, but that was the moment where I was you listen to you listen to Dick's Picks, or you listen to American Beauty studio stuff, Working Man's Dead, etc. But then when I saw the Dead live for the very first time at that Phil and Friends show, not the Dead, but then you get it. The bigness of it was the craziest thing in the world to me. I can't describe that feeling of how big it actually felt in a little stadium. And I think that's to this day sticks with me. It almost makes my hair on the back of my neck stand up thinking about it.
Nice. And how many shows with Jerry did you get to see, David?
Saw 100 on the dot.
Wow.
And then I saw 3 other Jerry Garcia band shows separate from the Dead. So I saw Jerry live 103 times. I saw a lot of shows 87 to 93. My last show was at Buffalo Rich Stadium where the Bills play.
Yeah.
Last show was June 13th, 93. And the Dead kept going for a couple more years. I didn't. I was 2 years into my college career, and I was so singularly focused on the Dead for so long that I didn't have room in my life for both being a good student and paying money for that privilege, that right, or listening to the Dead. It was all or nothing for me. So I kind of put the Dead on hold for about 3 years, came back in 96, still in university for another 3 years after that. But when I came back in 96, it was with a fresh appreciation for the Dead's music. By then, Jerry was gone. He left in 95. But I came back for the first time, I think, with a critical ear, which I never had before. When I was a teenager, everything was the best thing ever.
Right.
When I came back in 96, I could really appreciate when the Dead were on a tape. I really loved it. And I was getting a little pickier. And I think that really helped with the job I ended up getting in 1999. So it's been 26 years with them. But I got a master's degree in film archiving, which again, it was academic film studies. So I became pretty critical of art in terms of trying to figure out how to objectively put labels on art and say, you know, this is good or this is not as good, as opposed to I love this and I don't love this. So yeah, I think it set me up well taking those 3 years off, and I took it off completely. And I got into so much other music. That's when I became, you know, a Pearl Jam freak and so many other bands. I got into jazz really heavy. A lot of good bands were coming out in the mid 90s.
Yep.
So I really kind of started digging a lot of stuff. But coming back to the Dead, and aside from those 3 years, since about 1985 till now, so 40 years, I've pretty much listened to the Dead every day, many hours for about 40 years minus 3 in the middle.
I love that you took a break, because like I think that's really that I had that exact same experience with Fish, where like I was really into Fish in high school and chasing them around the Mid-Atlantic for their basically from 2002 to 2004, and then they took their hiatus, which lined up perfectly with my freshman year in college. And I got back from Coventry and then went to Temple University literally a week later for freshman orientation. And then I was hard out. I was like, Fish is done. I'm never going to dabble back in this world again. Musically, like I didn't even listen to Fish for, you know, honestly like 6 or 7 years. And I just considered it kind of a chapter of my life behind me. And then whenever they started going back into, or, you know, touring again, it became this like wonderful new rich chapter of my life. And I think that's like, I just really respect like the idea of a break, like, and how much appreciation it can give you for the art, you know?
And it sounds like both of you guys, you know, chose to take those breaks when you're roughly around the same year. Jerry's dying maybe prompted yours, David. I got a similar story, but I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys. My favorite band when I was a teenager through college was the Replacements from Minneapolis. The awesome like punk band, but very jangly, almost Big Star meets punk type of band. And I absolutely love them. And I got to see them. I went to Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania. I got to see the Replacements open for Tom Petty on the Full Moon Fever tour. And I got there just in time to see like Tommy Stinson throw up in his hands and spray the audience with it. The Replacements wore all of Petty's wife's dresses that they stole from her, from his dressing room, and just it was an abomination. They only played 2 songs, and it made me love them even more. But with them, I just gorged myself on their studio albums to such a degree that I became numb to the music of my favorite band, and consciously had to take some time off, and until there was a release of a show. There couldn't have been more than 300 people in the room at Maxwell's, the epic Hoboken club, and there's a Replacements album that came out that's a live like of that show, and that's somehow I was able to listen to that and be like, holy shit, and it re-sparked my love. But I did have to take some time off of my favorite band for that reason.
I love overlap. I'm just to bring this back to the Dead. I always love like punk scene overlap. Like as someone who didn't really experience the punk scene, I love the overlaps with like Dead scene, like in the punk world, like Black Flag, and they're like, and how much like Greg Ginn has said before about how like he really wishes that like Black Flag back in the day would have opened for like the Dead at one of their shows, which just would have been an insane thing to like imagine. But at the same point in time, it doesn't really feel out of like these days, at least, it doesn't feel like it's that out of scope as history has gone like, because back in the day, there was just like the clashing of cultures in those worlds. But now it's kind of like, yeah, actually, that probably would have made sense.
Have either you ever seen the mashup of the Minor Threat logo and the Grateful Dead
it's
logo?
So good. I love it.
Minor Dead.
Yeah. I mean, I live in LA. I see it all the time. So it's, you know, David, I wanted to talk to you really quick about Dave's picks. You know, I think it's such a beautiful packaging, the way that you put everything together. I love that it's not on streaming because it's so elusive and like it kind of feels like you're trading tapes or something like that back in the day, but beautifully remastered, or sounds beautiful and everything like that. What do you like? There's such a archive to dabble in. How do you apply an editorial lens to what makes it to how do you work within the organization to make these decisions around it?
We're at number 53, 54 comes out in a couple of months. The Baltimore 73 show. We just put out a Cincinnati 76. It's a vast archive. There's still about 1,500 shows in there that haven't been released. So pretty much, I get asked a lot, do you think you'll ever release X and X show? And the answer is, if it's a good show and we have it and it's not been released, there's absolutely a chance. And what it comes down to, so when we're working on a new release, right now we're putting a lot of work into 55 and 56, the ones that'll come in August and November of this year. And neither of them have been selected yet. But we know that the last couple, we did a 73 coming up. We got a 76 that just came out. We look at what we did last year. We look at last year's box set, which was a 1978 thing. We've got some other things coming out this year. So what we do is kind of look at what we haven't done for a little while. And we say, well, let's say it's the 80s or something.
Yeah.
So we haven't done a Brent in a little bit. Last year, we started the year with a couple of shows at the Frost in Palo Alto in 1985. So we'll look at things and we'll say, look, what haven't we done? And maybe there's a year we haven't done in 3 or 4 years or 5, 10 years. And then within that, I do so much listening. I've got an extensive set of notes. It's all in my head too. It's, these people who know their baseball stats, you could mention any baseball player the last 100 years and they'll give you their stat line. I can do that with the Dead. And it's not like I study it. I don't look at the set list and remember it. I listen to a show once, twice, 50 times, and it really sticks with me. And the set list, I saw the Dead 100 times, could tell you, I could list all 100 right now and the set list of all 100. And again, it's not something I studied. The stuff sticks with me. So when we're working on a new one, we'll think of the year that we kind of want to focus on. 55, we've got it down to 2 years, very different years, quite a few years apart. And within those two years, there's about 3 shows from each of those 2 years, specific tours actually from each of those years that we're looking at. So of the 5 or 6 shows we've got it narrowed down to right now, it'll become one of those and from one of those 2 eras. And then the one that doesn't could very likely become number 56. We're very flexible in the way we do things. So I could be working really hard on something from a certain year. And then I'll kind of move directions. So I'll listen to this for a little bit and I'll get so jazzed up by it that I'll kind of put that other idea on hold. And Baltimore 73, March 26th, the one that's coming out a couple months. Good example. That one's come close to being released many times. And for whatever reason, I'll just start listening to something else. Like, oh, you know what? We'll put this one out now. We'll get back to Baltimore sometime. I've been doing this with Baltimore 73 for 25 years. So it's finally time. We have so much flexibility in how we do things. To bring it back to Dogfish Head, I remember the first time when we collaborated on the first beer over 10 years ago. A bunch of the Rhinos, Mark Pincus and some of the licensing team went to Rehoboth Beach. Yeah. And we went to the old place, not the new, beautiful, big restaurant with the big stage, really small place. Sam was there. His key people were there. And I remember the big tubs or whatever, the bucket, the things that you brew the first batch in. And we had these giant wooden spoons and we're mixing it up. And I specifically remember the theme ingredient then was granola. Mm-hmm. And we were just about done stirring, and then Sam looked at his chief brewer and said, let's put a bit more honey in. And it was, I don't even know if you measured, but you know what you're doing. So you put a bit more in, that's it. That's what we needed. It was, another liter or pint of honey. And it was just the improvisational flexibility of doing that. And then they're writing it down because if it is the right recipe, you want to make sure you nail it when you go big on it. Yep. So it was done with methodology, just as we do, but at the same time, inspiration. And it's when you're inspired, you can change direction, you can tweak things. And then, you're making notes of it. And then if it works, then you can repeat it. And that's kind of how we do things, is that we've got incredible flexibility. We improvise. As an archivist, as a producer, I'm not making the music. I'm very aware of that. So I'm facilitating getting it out to the world. But within that, I have the creativity of deciding what direction it goes for the next release. And every time we don't release a great show, it could be the next one. It could be in 10 years. We have no end in sight on this. So, we've done 53, 54 of these. I mean, I don't see why we're not going to get to 100 in another 12, 13 years. We started the Dave's Picks series, 2012.
Yeah.
And so we'll just keep going. And it's really a continuation of the Dick's Picks and then the road trips and now the Dave's Picks. So it's really just a continuation. And we always have the philosophy, because Mark Pincus, the president of Rhino, huge Deadhead.
Yep.
I'm a huge Deadhead. I live and breathe this stuff. It's first and foremost my identity of who I am. I'm a Deadhead. So it's by Deadheads for Deadheads is kind of how Mark and I always look at things. That I mean, I'm sure Sam is the same way. He's drinking a beer right now, a juicy pale ale, and he knows what he likes, and he's got good taste. That's proven. He's an expert in beer, and I don't know if I call myself an expert in Grateful Dead music, but I'm a Deadhead, so I do know what I like. All of my friends are Deadheads, so my sounding board are people who are going to give me honest feedback, and it's I'm sure Sam is the same way. So I love what I do. I mean, it's a lot of work sorting through the archive, because you could go in any direction of those 1,500 shows, but we're patient. We know that the show that doesn't come out next might come out after that.
That's really awesome to hear. As a frequent listener of your radio show, where like you talk about kind of the historical moments around like the context of a Dead show, I always wondered how you applied a little bit of an editorial lens as to what to actually release, and everything like that. So it's really, really cool to hear. I have one question for you. We're kind of getting towards the end here. I have one question though that I have to ask you. I have been wondering about this. This is a question that goes back to like the first time I read a Dennis McNally book or like anything like that. As an archivist, what is the white whale? Like, what is the Betty boards were such a monumental historical, accomplishment to how we think about the preservation of like Dead's music. What is like, and this might just be an unknown thing, but like, is there a white whale that exists out there in Dead history that like just hasn't been uncovered yet? Like, but we feel like it might be out there.
Yeah, I think for the most part, every Dead show that was performed from 1971 to 95 was recorded, mostly by the band, soundboard recordings. But if not, in a couple of cases, there are at very least audience tapes that sound good. There's one final show from 1979 that didn't circulate forever, and it's recently been unearthed, a mediocre audience recording, but now the record is complete from 71 to 95. It was a Tulsa February 79 show that's now out there, which is great. But there was one tour in October and November of 1970. Owsley Bear had gone to jail. And Owsley was doing all the recordings in 69 and 70. July of 70, Bear went to jail for a couple of years. And it took the crew about 6 months to get their bearings set to start recording again. So it really wasn't until December 70, January, February 71 that the recording started. So there's this very good, very important tour from October and November 1970 that I still think that there might be recordings out there, whether it was the Capitol Theater in Port Chester crew maybe making recordings or somebody on the sound crew. We've had some things come back over the years. As you mentioned, the Betty boards, everything came back to the vault about 6 years ago, all of that 1976 to 79, plus a bunch of other stuff. We've had 3 other collections from 1969, 70, and 71 come back over the years, over the last maybe 15 years, where a crew member clearing out a garage finds a box and gives us a call and says, "Hey, I've had these tapes for 30, 40 years, and it's nothing malicious. It's no ill intention. It was a very loose vault back then in the 70s. So a crew member could take tapes home and listen to them because they were awesome. And you just forget to return them. So there's no ill will, and there's certainly no ill intentions. But we've got a few things back, which has been really nice. So I don't think we're at the end of things coming back. But whenever I hear somebody says, "Oh, I know a guy who knew a guy who worked on the crew," I follow up on all of those because they might come to something.
That's so awesome to think that there might be some uncirculated dead out there, like, still, because I don't know, like the way these things get curated and the way they get sourced, to me is kind of part of the lore. I think you said there's no ill intentions there. I've always been confused about like pizza tapes lore, because I'm like, the origin of how pizza tapes like got, or at least the story we're told, like, it always felt like it was like kind of shitty that, this pizza guy like stole, these tapes, and then suddenly, you know what I mean? Like, but like that helps, whatever. Like it helps build lore around it in some ways,
Yeah.
Like Watergate.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Watergate. Like,
exactly.
Well, great. So I have one concluding question that I wanted to ask. We have 60 years of the Dead. We have a wonderful Dogfish Head beer that we're going to be all enjoying over the course of this wonderful anniversary year. And I think, if you follow the trajectory, there's a lot of talk about legacy, how the music endures and everything like that. And there's, I mean, it's a very endearing joke, but we all have our favorite ways of how the Dead's music is going to enduring. And I'm kind of curious, like, what those are. It could be for each of you. It could be cover bands. It could be some of these, technological production achievements they're doing with like the Sphere. It could be unearthing new history. It's been such a creative period, though, the last 15 years for the Dead's music, that like I would be remiss if I didn't end this conversation with like getting some perspective on that future.
It's manifold. I think that this will continue. I mean, we're listening to Beethoven 200 and something years later. And it's certainly not Beethoven performing the music, it's interpretations of it. And whether it's recordings, I see it as the archival recordings will be a huge part of it. And they always have been since since tape trading, that's in the 70s. The Dick's picks started early 90s, now the Dave's picks. I certainly think the archival releases and the accessibility of those, I think even greater, I think, is the band members' continued activities, whether that's Dead and Company with Bob and Mickey and some incredible players, or Bobby doing Wolf Brothers. Mickey's always doing something interesting. Billy is too.
Yeah.
They're continued. And then the other ways to consume your Dead, the cover bands. And, Sam and I are doing this thing in New York in a couple weeks, and there will be a band performing Grateful Dead music. It's a way to consume Grateful Dead in a public setting, the community. And that community is never going away, is that, there's always going to be places for people to gather. And that includes online. That includes whether it's an online chat group or we do these videos that we put online. We did during the pandemic a lot. These we play a
they were great. I watched so many of them. They're awesome.
And, again, we couldn't have people in a room enjoying it, but we could have them in their room enjoying them simultaneously. So I think that between all of the activities, and then, Rhino does such an incredible job in partnering with the best, partnering with Dogfish Head, partnering with, I've got a pair of skis behind me. That's
your Atomic Bed Chetlers. Yep.
Exactly. So, we partner with the best, and that's a credit to Rhino, from Mark Pincus, the licensing team, Judy and Alex and Russell. They're the ones who, an instant yes when it goes to Dogfish Head, because it's the right partner. So I think by partnering with these incredible licensees and the partners, they're not only best in class, they're the right ones in the class. Dogfish Head is the right fit for us. So I think all those ways in keeping the Dead in the public consciousness, whether it's archival releases, Dead and Company, Wolf Brothers, the current band member activities, and then all the cover bands. Like, you can get out there and dance to Grateful Dead music anytime. And then the podcast for those who want to know more about the history. I mean, the good old Grateful Dead cast, Jesse and Rich, are doing a magnificent job as researchers, as historians, as podcast hosts. It's pretty amazing to watch.
Amazing. Yeah, and I would add, a shameless plug for David and his show, which you already mentioned, Brandon.
It's the best. It's like the best. It's such a great nuggets of Dead history. I love it.
A 24-hour Dead channel, it's pretty amazing.
It's great. And for us, shorter term, I would say David and I and friends are cooking on another album. More to come on that. That might happen soon. And then we're already cooking on other recipes that we think would fit well next to this juicy pale ale and would be complementary to it. And, and then when I think of longer term, I think of the fact that, my son's as into the band as I am, and an era when he and his wife are hopefully turning their kids onto the Dead. That's another way that I'm excited and hopeful that it will live on. My daughter's more into Taylor Swift. That's cool. I know. I think David's daughter is as well, and a bunch of different bands. But the Dead pull in the Calagione household is very real. It's the force is with us. So I'm looking forward to seeing where the force takes us as a family and as a brewery, because those definitely converge in our world.
I have to ask, what is your son's favorite Dead cover band?
He likes the fast Russo's Almost Dead.
The J-Rad one?
Yeah, he likes the intensity of that. You mentioned Capitol Theater earlier. You or David did. My son and Dash, who worked on the album with David, my son and I got to sit next to Pete Shapiro at Capitol Theater to see Phil Lesh and Friends maybe just 4 years ago. So that was an amazing moment on this timeline as well.
Yeah. Those Phil shows were special. I got a chance to go to his first Sullivan Hall one in New York City. That he did with the family band right after. It was the second one he ever did after the one that he did at his Terrapin place. And oh my gosh. Amazing. Okay. I can talk music all day with you guys. Thank you so much for your time. This is wonderful. I really, really appreciate the time and the thoughtfulness, and congratulations to Sam on the release. David, so great to meet you. Thank you so much for your insight. Keep on doing.
Trucking.
Yeah, keep on trucking.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of the day. Appreciate y'all.
A lot of fun, guys. See you later.